ಆಗ್ತದೆ.
Oh, hi.
Super. Hi.
I think
A little more. I'm trying. I'm studying. But I am going to have my wonderful friend Biljana Vukovic help me to translate for this presentation today. I am an artist and I live in New York City, and I have worked for many years in the hand paper making process. I started, like all of you, making art and trying to find different materials to express myself. So what I hope to accomplish today is to show you paper as an art medium and how simply and beautifully it can be made into something that's entirely independent, or something that's part of graphic arts making, or something that's part of sculpture. Many artists from all over the world worked in hand paper making, and you'll see some very complicated equipment. What I brought today is very simple equipment, because I want to show you that it's possible with very few materials and very simple things that you can get here in Serbia to do hand paper making and to work in paper as an art form. Different people all over the world, people like Ivana, your professor, have come up with new ways to make paper and other art forms possible. So it's only limited by your own creativity. I'd like to start by showing you artworks which I hope will inspire you, and then I'd like to show you how the process is actually done. So we'll start with some photographs of art from the Donne Papermill.
To je isto samo jedno objašnjenje Marise, je dugo godina radila u radionici za ručno pravljenje, to može da bude isto.
So this first artist, ona se zove Laura Anderson Barbata. Ona je iz Mexico. Iz Mexico. She works in the Amazon to gather special fibers and material to make sheets of paper, and she makes sculpture with that paper. So each of these pieces, each of these columns, is many sheets of paper which were air dried with wire through them to create these sculptures in this environment. On se zove Mel Wagner, on is American. On je iz Amerike. And this is simply handmade paper conceptual art project where he measured the different handmade paper pieces and created an art project. This is an artist named Chuck Close, also from the United States. He is actually an interesting fact, the wealthiest artist in the world. He has created artworks that go for upwards of $1 million a piece. He was the first artist to work in hand paper making.
Da shvatimo, i on je jedan od prvih umetnika koji se bavio umetnošću od papira. Vi znate, on radi one velike autoportrete. On je izvodio autoportret od kulpa, to će sam napisati.
And I'll show the paper making process with this piece later, but you can see the entire project was done in paper. No graphics, no drawing, all different colored papers. And you can see in this professional studio, which is Donne Papermill, the possibility is actually quite large. Paul Wong is considered the master of papermaking. He's invented many of the techniques that are in use today, and has been named by the National Endowment for the Arts in the United States as a national treasure. This is a funny piece. I'm showing you things that are probably making you think quite hard, but it shows you the extent, the expansiveness of what can be made in hand paper making. This is a Japanese artist. Her name is Emiko Kasahara. And this is all in handmade paper, made like note tablets, and the lines are actually human hair. It's interesting to tell also, I have a piece of hers from when I worked in the studio, and she made handmade paper and made little grids with false eyelashes on the paper.
Melisa ima jedan umetnički komad koja je umetnica njoj poklonila kada je radila sa njom u toj radionici, gde je u ručno pravljenom papiru ugradila veštački preklopnici.
This shows how paper can be used also as a sculptural object. Certain fibers are, such as pamuk, are very soft. And then other fibers such as lanan, conoplia, abaca, which is from the Philippines, are very hard and rattly, very much like parchment or animal skin. And because they shrink quickly, this artist was able to make paper with nails in between two sheets, and when it shrank, it created the sculpture. One thing Biljana and I have been trying to work on in Belgrade is showing the students about artist books. In parts of Europe and the United States, we have traditions that are very specific, and artist books happens to be one of them. This is a very famous, I brought this because probably many of you know, Sacho Nyosh. He was a Nobel laureate, I believe, poet, brilliant poet. And an artist named Amanda Guest collaborated with his estate to create a small edition of his poems with artworks that reflected the poems. This is an artist named Jonathan Seliger. He's also an American. Also, everything in this process, it's an edition of 10 pieces, and it was all made in handmade paper. The text was silk-screened, and the actual pie, which is a very common, it's like smoky here. Everybody knows this kind of pie, and it symbolizes American culture. And this was all cast in handmade paper with pieces of paper made and printed with silkscreen. This is an artist named Jennifer Krauss. I brought this to show, again, another sculptural technique with paper. These pieces are three-dimensional, and they are wrapped around wire armatures, and they shrink tight. And she had a room full of these objects. The dark part around the top is actually rust powder. This is maybe not such a good slide, but I wanted to show that paper can also be cast. It's very simple to create a mold with objects and take wet pulp, just like what I'm going to show you today, and cast it so that it becomes an actual mirror image of the original piece. Another example of sculptural techniques in handmade paper. This is an artist named Melvin Edwards. Another example of how pulp can be used as a graphic medium. I'll try to explain this very simply, but it's 2 sheets of paper, and the actual objects, in this case gloves and chains, were put onto a piece of paper, manipulated, and then made right into another piece of paper. This is another artist who works also entirely in pulp. It is possible to paint with pulp. So this piece is actually pulp painting. As you can see, you can color pulp in any color that you want, and it can be brushed, it can be sprayed, it can be used with molds, it can be manipulated in almost any way you can imagine. And he does artworks about mold. So this was actually a mold that grew on food. Everything you see besides the eggshells in this piece is cast and made out of paper. There are over 3,000 bathroom wall tiles. The toilet, the sink, the animals, not the figures, and the bathtub are all cast in handmade paper. Also interesting to mention that the tiles were done in lino cut, so that the paper was pulled, and then it was printed almost simultaneously to create very high relief embossings.
A da su sa linorezom rađene pločice, odnosno da je pulpa, praktično vlažna pulpa stavljena kao na matricu linoreza, tako da se dobijalo embossing reljef, tako da se reljef.
This is an artist named Arlene Shekett. She does a lot of work about mandalas and about Indian culture, which she's very interested in. It is possible to draw very fine lines with pulp by using plastic and cutting razor blade lines through plastic and using pulp like ink. And that's how this piece of paper was accomplished. The base sheet here is made out of abaca. To do many layers of pulp on top of each other, and that's what happened here. If you understand linoleum cutting or etching color separations, then you understand how paper can be made in separate forms and printed one on top of the other, which is basically what happened here. Silk screen was used to create this image. So a silk screen was made exactly the way you would prepare a silk screen for silk screen printing, and instead of being printed with silk screen, pulp was used in the mold.
Ovdje je konkretno upotrebljen princip sito štampe, znači kao u situ su otvarana sito, znate kako se radi sito, za svaku boju se otvori emulzija i onda se nanosi boja. Tako da je ovdje svaka boja rađena.
This is a piece by an artist named Bart Wasserman, and I brought it to demonstrate how the different pulps interact with one another. The white, bellowy pamuk, that tan color, is lanen. And when they are put together, one dries much faster than the other, and so what you create is sort of a topographical map effect.
Ovo je interesantan primjer kako se različito ponašaju pri sušenju različite pulpe. Znači ovdje umetnik iskoristio dve pulpe, bela je pamuk, ova tamnija je lan, i sad pošto se svaka suši, svaka ima različito degirno i ponašanje različito, dolazi do tog razvlačenja. Jedna se više skuplja, druga se manje skuplja i u procesu sušenja nastaje ta neka tipografska slika. Znači sama se slika formira u procesu sušenja pulpe.
This artist is an African-American artist named Willie Cole. He does a lot of artwork about black experience in the United States. This paper is made out of sugar cane. Historically, African-Americans farmed sugar cane. And the burns are irons. And he actually physically burned the paper to create a print. African Americans in the United States were used a lot as domestic labor. So it's images about black experience in the United States. This is a sculptural work by an artist named Winifred Lutz, and it's all made with lamen. It's a complicated process, but basically she made wire forms, made paper, and then laid the paper over the forms in order to. So this is just a shot to show how she uses a piece of paper and then can mold it over certain types of forms to create sculpture. Another example of how paper can be used as a sculptural medium. Again, these are just simply wire forms, and the paper was cast over the wire forms and left to dry.
Ovo je do nekoj slično, znači isto postoji žičana armatura kao kostur i onda je mokra pulpa preko toga nanošena i ostavljena da se osuši.
Maybe you skate back and then there's another set. Smaller, but hopefully you can see them. This is a pulp painting. I just put more images in here for you to be able to see the full extent. This looks like an aqua tint, but in fact it's a pulp painting. French, actually her name is Louise Bourgeois. She's often in the Venice Biennales and very important international art shows, and she loves Donne paper. She uses that paper exclusively, And she actually brings a little color swatch and says, please make me paper in this color. So there's actually a signature line I saw earlier with the frames, the chuck clothes. Its dimensions are approximately 100 centimeters by 150 centimeters.
Ovo je kao gotova varijanta tog autoportreta Chucka Klausa, koji je rađen od bojane papirne kolbe i to su finalne dimenzije, su metar sa metar i po, znači tako izgleda završen komad. Znači to su različite sive, how many grays were there?
Probably 15.
Oko 15 različitih valenskih vrednosti, znači sivih, od najsvetlijih do najtamnije, i onda su bukvalno kao kaplice, kao mozaik slikan mokre pulte rađeno i onda se to usušilo i sjedilo.
It's well worth looking him up on the internet to see these paintings.
Savjetuje vam da preko interneta potražite i da pogledate malo Chucka Klausa, to je najjači ponačin.
I wanted to show you this example for another sculptural technique. This is an artist named Leslie Dieu. You can go to the next slide just to show. Ooh, sorry, go back. Somewhere in here, go forward. I have the mold, which we'll find. It should be next to the slide, but he's not. To show how she makes a rubber mold to create the form of the head, and the paper was actually hand cut and then laid into a mold. Oh yeah, Mona Hattam, who's a very famous French artist, fabulous. She does some very simple ink portraits of people's faces, very psychological pieces. And this is actually a human brain, and it was done with two pieces of paper sandwiched together. One of them was made with a mold, with a form, something like this. In the shapes of the human brain, and then put on top of another piece of paper and left to dry naturally so that it has that topography. He makes beautiful, large, quilt-like pulp paintings. And these are I'm actually going to show you the technique with which this was done. He makes different colored papers, and we can lay them all next to each other to create one huge piece of paper. Working with Dušica Kiljaković. I was the paper maker, and Dušica was the print maker. This is with a Puerto Rican artist named Juan Sanchez, who's very famous and a beautiful person in addition. This piece is called Cries and Whispers. It was about the birth of his child. And the paper is absolutely huge, also like the Chuck Close paper, and we built a mold so that it could be pulled in this shape, not in a square shape. Into the regular demonstration, does anybody have questions?
Pre nego što krenemo sa praktičnom demonstracijom, imate li pitanje? Ovo je sada najjednostavnija oprema koju je donela Melisa da vam pokaže kako vadi papir i različite materijale, da vidite, postoji generalna razlika između istočnog papira i zapadnog načina pravljenja papira.
In the slides where you saw the paper being pulled in the vat, that image is basically just this plastic tub. The huge thing that they were pulling through is just I use a plastic tub as a substitute.
Znači, potpuno isti princip, samo što umjesto velike table
around. This is a combination of mulberry, which actually does grow here in Serbia. Dud, maybe you know the material. And this also has some palm oil in it. It was pulped, as Ivana maybe has done with some of you. It was pulped in a professional beater, which I brought with me to the University of Belgrade. But Ivana is able to use a blender. Some fibers can be used with a blender, some cannot. One of the things I did with the university this year was I brought a piece of equipment that allows me to pulp anything that I want, and that includes lanen, kukuruz, dud, konoplya, many different things that make the kinds of paper you saw in the slides. This is the same fiber that I just showed you, the white fiber, but with pigment. I'm able to color it any color that I want, and you saw quality pigments. But it's also possible, as Ivana knows well, to get very high quality results with acrylic paint, for instance.
Može da se pulpa boji pigmentima, ali isto tako što je Ivana naša jako lepo otkrila, može da se radi i sa najobičnim akrilik bojama i da se pulpa oboji vrlo kvalitetno i da dobijete nijansi i boje kakve god želite, kakve su vam potrebne.
Also, with pulp, there are many different things that it can be manipulated with. You saw on the slides that people were actually painting with a brush. This tube is able to be used to pour the pulp into molds, which I'm going to show you shortly. And this fiber is a combination of cotton and linen. Linen has a tendency to be a little bit smoother in order to paint with, but cotton can certainly be used. It can be used to make paper. I like to just talk about an easy way to recognize what they are so that hopefully if somebody gets interested in making paper, they can recognize the differences. Serbia has fascinated me for a long time because of the agricultural tradition here, and things that are incredible for paper making grow in this country. And a leaf from a corn stalk, you immediately understand the differences between what makes paper and what doesn't. It's those thick strands that are in the corn leaves that have cellulose, which is what is the basis of paper. I have experimented very successfully with some things that would never make sense, like mushroom, for instance. This is one of my top 3 most prized possessions. It's a mold and decal made by Zoran Gajic, who is an artist from Belgrade and also a paper maker. So I'm just going to take this around and show you. This is what the paper is actually made on, and it's called a Lathe Mold. You'll notice the lines that are going through it. It's very simply metal that is attached to this back in order to give it strength. It's made out of mahogany. Also invented a machine in order to make pulp. He built it completely by himself, and he uses it in Belgrade. He's one of my heroes. A very simple thing made out of an old lithographic plate is probably the most important piece of equipment that I have here today. It allows me to make a sheet of paper inside a small vat. This becomes my vat, as opposed to this. So I don't have to fill the entire vat with pulp. I can simply fill this with pulp. And if you remember from the pictures of Paul working with the artist, creating many different sheets of paper, this is how that was done. And it's a very simple way to change color, to change techniques, to change style.
Zapamtite, a to je stara bačena ova offset ploča, znači tanak linoleum, tanak aluminijum koji se seče makazom.
Paper was actually invented in China back in 105 AD. It preceded everything and was the first formal system by which people could really paint. The evolution of from Eastern to Western paper went from China, and the birthplace of Western civilization's paper, which started using this very mold, was in Samarkand, which is in the former Soviet republics. It went from there to Italy, Spain, Germany, and one of my enduring questions is why it didn't land in Serbia, because Serbia had the second press in Cetinje, or Serbia, Crna Gora, had Cetinje's press, which came right after Gutenberg. So to me, this is one of the great mysteries of paper, why it varied. And there are actually many more techniques than these two, but these are the main ones. This is a Japanese sugeta. The mold is actually hinged like a book, and the paper is actually pulled onto a bamboo screen, and this is actually what is laid down to transfer the paper. Very different styles of method. They pulled Western or Eastern method.
Ovaj papir od Duda, znači ova pulpa od Duda može da se pravi i na istočni način i na zapadni.
The main difference between Japanese and Western papers is the length of the fiber. If you've ever seen Japanese paper, the fibers can be this long or longer, and that's what creates the strength in the paper.
Ono što čini osnovnu razliku
The abaca, if it's raw. Tororoi is the formation aid.
Formation aid.
Good.
Okay.
But I'm going to talk about formation aid.
Znači, japanski papir, kako možete da prepoznate i ono što je njegova karakteristika, ima duga vlakna. To su biljke sa dugim vlaknima koje ostanu vidljivo u papiru, tako da papir, iako je vrlo tanak, sa tim vlaknima dobije veliku žilavost. To je u suštini jak papir koji ne može da se cepa, čak i kad možda se vidi kroz njega.
Probably an interesting thing to say is that if you beat corn for a short amount of time, you could pull it Japanese style, and if you beat it for a long period of time, you could make it look much more like cotton.
Aha, da od kukuruza isto može da se dobije neka slična vrsta papira kao japanski, jer kada se, to se tuče ovim tučkom za meso, kada se tuku ta vlakna, ako se manje tuku, ona ostanu onako duža i jača i mogu da liče, da podsjećaju na japanski papir, ako je baš dobro istučeno i napravimo kašaskim, onda više liče na zapadni način.
So, Biljana and I are going to do our magic trick now. I need your help. Without being able to see this, I'll show you when it comes out, but I'm submerging this in water. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a water level that comes up to about here, so that I can pour pulp and manipulate it like a vat and then pull it up and have the water drain.
Sad ćemo da napravimo jedan mali trik. Kada se pravi više listova papira, onda se u celu kadu razmuti ova pulpa, znači pulpa je skroz unutra i vade se listovi. Pošto će sad da proba da vam pokaže različite stvari, onda idemo ovim principom. Ona će da potopi malo ovaj ram sa ovim okvirom u vodu i onda sipamo samo znači u okviru ovog rama pulpu. Onda će s njom da manipuliše i da je izvadi, tako da ćete vidjeti kako to izgleda.
In Japanese paper, a material is used called formation aid, which actually conditions the fiber and makes it flow more easily.
Ovo je sad neki, kako mi se kaže, kako se kaže za kosu, regenerator, conditioner. Postoji jedna supstanca koja se stavlja u japanski papir koja slično deluje kao da se stavlja ovaj omekšivač, da bi vlakna bila rastresita, da se ne bi lepili i da su onako svilenkasti i razdvojene.
Okay, so I'm going to have you pour and I'll say stop, and I'm holding the mold. I'm holding the mold together down inside of the vat, and then we're going to pull a rabbit out of the hat. Okay. Keep going. About half of it. A little bit more. There you go. I'm agitating the pulp.
Sada mora dobro da ga protrese, da bi se to ujednačilo.
Can everybody see that? And then I can take this off, drain it a little bit more. I'm always very scared of this moment because when I have such a small number of materials to couch on top of, there isn't a lot of water. So sometimes it will stick to the screen instead of the pelon, but let's see what happens. I'm doing a technique here called couching, which comes from the French word coucher, meaning to lay down, among other things.
Ovo je sad prebacivanje na objasnit ću vam šta je pelon. Znači sada je prebacila papir i na engleskom je reč couching od francuskog coucher, odnosno leći. Znači, legla je papir.
Is it okay, just a little bit of dribble on the floor?
Može malo da kapim.
Okay. I just want to show it to you at the point. The paper is about 80% water.
U ovom stepenu papir je otprilike 80% vode.
So right now, I'm going to pull a little bit of water out of the paper so that I can show you an artistic technique.
Sad će da mu sa poleđene će malo da pokupi koliko može vodu da bi mogla vam pokaže neku drugu tehniku.
The paper, so I can actually remove or change the shape simply by, and then I can reuse this pulp. can also change the shape if I wanted to now. I could make it circular, change its shape, do all kinds of different techniques in the paper. Now what I want to show you is how we can make a piece of shaped paper. I cut this also out of an aluminum, just an aluminum lithographic plate. You see the back, it's dirty. Just cut it out with a razor blade.
To je otpadovi kosi ploče.
I'm going to do this with blue pulp. So, I'm just going to ask you to, you can probably put it, sponge it with your hand. Go ahead. I think so. And this pulp is very slow draining because it's made out of linen. And it's also going through a very small hole.
Se treba više vremena zato što su I lanene I ide kroz vrlo mali otvor, znači da treba malo više.
The cross section, because that's where it's being exposed. And I can actually pull some of the extra pulp away. So you get the idea of the different things that can be done to shape the paper. And now, God willing, I'm able to put this onto the other paper. So now you understand the basic technology of how two sheets of paper can be integrated into one sheet.
Sad vidite u stvari kako se različiti slojevi I različite boje integrišu kada se mokro na mokro stvari nanese I u procesu sušenja oni se povežu.
I can also take molds like this simple mold and take the pulp.
Ovo sad što vidite, zapamtite, to je jako interesantno I kad budete negde u istoriji umetnosti našli Davida Hockneya I bazene ogromne koje pravi od papirne kupe, znači na identičan način. To su komadi više od 2 metra su veliki, gde su pravljene te kao modlice za kolače koje prave crtež I onda su pulpe različitih boja ulivane u sve te modlice, modlice su sklanjane I onda se tako pravila ta slika.
Now I just want to show a method in how to pull a Japanese sheet. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. So I'm not filling an entire vat. I'm going to be pouring the way I poured with this material and using this, but the way I organized it was so that I can use it on here. So it's possible to do very simple Japanese without having to fill a vat and doing it with a small amount of pulp. The real advantage to this technique is that it allows you to work with a small amount of pulp, and if you are using a blender, the only way you can do it is with a small amount of pulp.
Ovo je sad na jednostavan način kako može da se napravi japanski papir koristeći malu količinu pulpe koja je znači i ekonomična i zgodna. Umjesto da se puni cela kada sa tom pulpom, radići ga na ovaj pojednostavljeni način. Što je korisno da se zna ako neko hoće da radi sam za sebe, pre može da radi tako nego nekim velikim količinama.
And we're going to do the same thing we did with that first one. The technique that I did, that's a piece of mulberry. That's because I added a Serbian mulberry to it. Did you notice how I was shaking it back and forth as I was pulling it out of the vat? I do that to make the sheet as even as possible throughout.
Znači, da bi dobila što ujednačeniju masu, onda u stvari su pokrite napred, nazad, levo, desno, da bi se ta vlakna rasprostrla, isprepletala i povezala što je ravnomernije.
Oh! We're going to have to do that one again. Now, in Japanese style, this is actually what gets transferred.
Znači, ta mrežica od bambusa u japanskom načinu pravljenja papira je osnova sa koje se prebacuje list.
Draining as much water out of the fiber before I transfer. And the paper is actually physically laid down. And the screen, as you can see, is pulled back like so. So you can see it's very different technology than the Western method. And there's the second sheet of paper. Now, this is full of water, obviously. There are a number of different ways that people dry paper, and one of the things we've been working with at the university is to come up with easy ways to do paper drying.
Pošto vidite da u stvari pulpa prenesu papir i ostaje da se suši.
So they actually pull these different types of paper. They often use a press, which we have. I think, Ivana, did you tell me you have a book press here? No, where we can clip the papers and then they're dry.
Kad se iscedi višak vode, čak može zajedno sa ovim na pelonu, na toj osnovi. Mi smo u radionici stavili konopci, štipaljke i onda na kraju, kad završimo turu pravljenja papira, samo štipaljkama okačimo te peloni i papire i sutra kad dođemo papiri su suvi, samo ih skinemo.
Here's a photograph of our studio at the university.
A ovo dole zeleno, to vam je ova knjigovezačka presa. I znači, ako se napravi čitava gomila tih sendviča, pelon papir i to naraste, onda stavimo unutra između i pritisnemo i onda se iscedi. Znači, višak vode jednostavno iscuri sa strane.
I think you're in here, Ivana. A great question. It can be done in a blender, but the machine that I brought for the university is this. It's called a Hollander beater. They are very expensive pieces of equipment and a very smart man. In this photograph, they're actually cutting up rag. And the other is tear-offs, which I think you guys use for your paper. Tear-offs from prints And obviously, the better the quality of the paper, the better the pulped paper will be.
Ono što vam je uvek pri ruci što može da se koristi kao sirovina za papir, ovde vidite Tanju i Sandru koje seku čaršave, znači stari pamučni čaršavi mogu da se iseku na komadiće i da se samenju. Ili drugo, šta imate odbačeno, stari crteži, stare grafike, probni otisci koji nisu uspeli, sve to može da se iscepa.
5,000 pictures of the first load of pulp in this beater because I was so excited that this was the first cotton that it beat in that beater. You can go to the next slide. I just have this to show you. This is a Donne, and if you notice how large the vat is, what they're doing is very similar to what I was doing here, and it's quite interesting. They put the mold down into the vat, they line it with plastic, they pour the pulp in, and then they pull the plastic out, and all the water drains and pulp drains into the mold.
Sad, ove fotografije iz radionice Dieu gde se vidi kako prave jako veliki format papira, tako što u tu kadu, po sličnom principu, oni oblože plastikom, pa onda sipaju pulpu unutra, pa izvuku plastiku i onda se list iscebi. Jer je jako teško rukovati u vodi sa tim velikim ramovima i sa velikom kadom.
This is my hero, superhero, Donne This is a little complicated, but it's interesting to know that this technology of the beater that he created with the side that's up, he actually invented that.
Pametno rešenje problema.
If you take a look in throughout his studio, you see on the shelves he has lots of different things. He also works with native Serbian fibers, all of which can be found here.
Ova donja armatura koja služi da se papir ne bi ulegnuo kad se vadi, izvinite, može da se izvadi da bi se lakše opralo. Jer ovi ostaci pulpe kad ostanu po tom ramu, to je dosta komplikovano da se skine. A ovako...
Put it into the water so that it rots naturally and can be pulped without cooking. We have to cook pulps in order to make them...
koje su tamo ono što se praktično ne upotrebljava. I da se to dosta uklapa u Gandijevu filozofiju, bogatstvo od otpada, u stvari, znači ono što nije potrebno, te biljke koje bi se, kao što kod nas, lišće kukuruza koje trune, u stvari, na poljima. Ko koristi lišće kukuruza, a to predstavlja, dobro mislim.
Ali... We have questions?
Javite se pitanje. Moram da imate neko pitanje. Može na srpskom, ako se stidite na engleskom, nema veze.
Diana, you got any questions?
Is it your first visit to Nišu?
Ja sam prvi put u Niš.
Dobro.
What else? Can you juggle? Can you juggle?
Please don't.
How many people have worked in paper before? Has anybody worked with Ivana doing paper? How many people?
Ko je s Ivanom do sad radio? Je li neko još probao ručno pravljeni papir?
Yes. Okay, okay. All right. And what have you used primarily? The tear-offs? Is that what you've been doing? The tear-offs from prints?
Jeste uglavnom reciklažu ovih papira.
Okay. Did this slide presentation give you any ideas for other possibilities?
Je li vam vredilo ovo u smislu ideja za neke druge mogućnosti?
Ivana and I are in contact pretty frequently, and I can always offer technical assistance to anybody that's interested in ideas. The way I'm working with the students...
To isto da znate, kako vi sad imate vajar, vajarski kao reljef može isto tako da se napuni pulpom i da se, kad se osuši, izvadi, samo se prethodno namaže uljem, obično jestivim uljem, i da se u reljef koji imate namažete uljem, stavite pulpu.
će ova kamera? Ovo je velika, da, malo je naša.
Da.
Se vidi bogatstvo.
I onda idu u blender i onda se vadi, ovako se napravi u vodi, isto se ovako vadi.
I'm just trying to show how you can put two different sheets of paper together at the same time.
Aha. I ovo je isto interesantno, kad se naprave dva lista papira, jedan do drugih.
And we've been working with that a lot at the university because people want to be able to make larger sheets than is. Actually, this would probably be much more beautiful than just the white. Now that they're all mixed together. So, watch the technique. It's a fairly small vat, so I actually scoop it back and forth. So just take a look. And down, up, and shake gently. Nice. Now, if you make a mistake, it's very simple to change that mistake.
Jeste vidite kako se vraća, ako hoće da se, ako se nešto ne ostaje, samo se
return it right to
po
the vat.
površini vode i papir spada.
All right.
I Englezi, odnosno na engleskom se to zove kiss off.
All right. Like it here. Scoop forward. Okay. Down and back. Pretty good. Not bad. Stop. Not bad.
No.
And then this can come off.
Now
Now we're going to cooch. Bring it over here. Okay. So,
od ivice dole.
and roll front. It's much more beautiful than just the plain white paper. Very nice. I love this country. I love the artwork that you guys are doing. So for me, it's a real privilege to be here.
Zahvaljujem što ste bili. Zahvaljujem se isto na poklonima. Njen otac se bavi tkanjem i uopšte umetnosti svih vrsta i primenjene su njoj jako bliske. Zna za vašu školu koliko je tradicionalno dobra i poznata i bilo je zadovoljstvo da bude gost kod vas.